All right, we are live. What's going on, gentlemen? Hope you guys are having a great Wednesday. Just got back from the gym a little bit while ago, and we're ready to rock on the perfect fat loss diet for contractors. And really, before we get into anything, like if you don't know who I am, my name is Miles Wold. I own and operate the Winners Mindset Fitness Academy. This is a specific fitness academy for contractors such as yourself, right? Guys who are getting it after it in the field, guys who are getting after it in the office, guys who are owning and operating, any kind of blue collar business, really. And some of the biggest struggles that I see, contractors kind of run into is one, being low energy, high stress, and typically a little bit overweight, right? The clothes are fitting a little bit tired, and that begins to affect how they show up in their business, especially if they are doing typically any kind of business, you're talking to other people, right? So that certainly affects the presentation of yourself and how you show up towards other people. So on top of that, like that kind of leads to a little bit of confidence issues as well. So what we do is we actually give you the exact structure you need for the workouts, the diet, accountability, and support to help you lower your weight, feel better in your clothes, show up with more confidence, and ultimately have more energy in everything that you do, being able to have more energy to put into the business so you can scale it up and handle the stress even more and, have more energy for life outside of the business. I know a lot of us are, workaholics driven, and this is the busiest time of year for a lot of guys. So it only makes sense that, a large part of your day, 3/4 of your day is spent towards the business. And it only makes sense to have energy to keep up with that and to be able to drive it forward, right? And be able to have a clear and focused mind to bring on more employees, be able to have better conversations with clients so you can ultimately make more money and have that focus to have proper systems in place for your business. Now, before I go any further, like if you're watching live, comment hashtag live. If you're tuning in, watching the replay, comment hashtag replay and drop some questions as you go along. I'm going to go through those after the call here and answer anything that you guys have. So what I typically see, especially around diet, is contractors just don't know what to do. And that's totally okay, right? It makes sense. A lot of you guys are craftsmen and, driven and focused on business. You guys probably know a lot more about business than I do, especially, in the day-to-day grind and all that kind of stuff and having those kind of systems in place. So with all that, biggest problems I see around the diet is that contractors just don't know what to eat, right? Just have no idea. And that's totally okay, right? It's not your fault. It's not your fault. We've been bombarded with foods that kill our energy, make us gain weight, kill our confidence, have the clothes fit tighter, shows up in our face, shows up in our skin, shows up how we, show up for other people, right? So what I see is, again, contractors just don't know what to eat. So what I'd like for us to do, what I'll do here is actually break down the quality foods that are going to move the needle for you. And how I'm going to do that is really starting with a broad overview of the macronutrients, right? Because if we can understand food, then we can understand what foods we need for our body. If we can understand what food does to our body, we can understand what foods we need, right? So three main macronutrients. Number one is your protein. So this is going to be the most important one, right? This is something you do not, you do not want to undereat, because typically what happens is, you lose muscle mass and you gain fat, right? So protein at its most fundamental level, your body breaks it down into what's called amino acids, right? And amino acids are the foundational building blocks of muscle health, of your body, of your life. So to have these fundamental foundation of health and longevity, protein is the answer. So when broken down here, your body turns this into amino acids. And we'll just call those the foundational building blocks of muscle health and longevity. Now, the beauty about protein is that you can hardly overeat it, right? You can eat a lot of it simply because your body burns about, let's say for every 100 calories of protein that you eat, your body burns out about 20, 30% of that. So you're only actually digesting 70, 80 calories for every 100 calories that you have. So you can overeat it with little negative effects. So this is where actually like the carnivore diet and the keto diet actually get things right, because they really emphasize on having protein, on having fats, healthy fats to accompany that, right? Think of like your red meats, right? So foods that are going to be high in protein. So this is going to be like your poultry, your chicken, your turkey, beef. What else we have here? We got like Greek yogurt, dairy products, fish and seafood. And typically, like the darker the cut of the meat, the higher in fat it's going to be. And then the whiter cut of the meat, think of like your chicken breast, your turkey breast, your white fish, that's going to be still more or less the same amount of protein, just leaner. So there's going to be less flavor ultimately and less fat to it, right? So this is where, if you want to keep your calories down, this is where eating lean protein can really make a difference. So number 2 here, it's healthy fats. So number 1, really, really main thing to understand here, healthy fats do not make you fat. There is no one food that makes you fat rather. There might be foods that don't digest well, things like, maybe your breads, your grains, your pastas, things like gluten, stuff like that, and that is unique to you. So there is no specific one food that makes you fat. It is just general overeating and undermoving and low muscle mass that causes people to gain fat and gain weight and ultimately, lose their health, right? So what do the healthy fats do? So they actually, regulate your testosterone and estrogen, along with keeping your hair, nails, skin healthy, right? So maybe a lot of you guys maybe if you're watching this back and maybe you remember 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, a lot of it was kind of the low fat diet. And sure, at 9 calories per gram, let me just write that over here. 9 calories per gram. Yeah, a lot of people lost weight simply because you're cutting out the most calorie dense macronutrient. A lot of people lost weight, but they also sacrificed their health in the long term because their hormones were all messed up. Their hormones were all messed up. Their skin, nail health, hair, nail health, all that declined because they just didn't understand how healthy fats play a role in your body. They just went 0 fats, just had protein and carbs. Now, it's fine to do that, like advanced bodybuilders doing bodybuilding shows. They kind of do that in the late stages so they don't overeat on their calories. So they just have the protein and the carbs and all that kind of stuff. Now, for us mere mortals here, we don't need to get to that extent. So healthy fats are really important for you. So what kind of foods are going to be good for that? So this is going to be like your avocados, your butters, your olive oil, Olive oil is a fruit, so fruit oils, all that kind of stuff, coconut oil, red meats. Did I miss anyone here? Peanut butter, all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to get into what we're going to do to make sure we don't overeat on that, because it is super easy to overeat on these kind of fats, right? If you go to fast food quite a bit, and anything deep fried is going to be high in fats, high in carbs, low in protein. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people are still hungry after eating those, super tired, super lethargic, and then, wonder why they gain weight over time. So in terms of most important for the body, protein and healthy fats are required for health and longevity, right? If you try and cut those two and just focus on, just eating carbs for whatever reason, you will face some serious consequences. Your health will decline ultimately. So this is where we get into carbohydrates. Not carbohydrates, but they are made of carbon. Carbohydrates. So same thing here as proteins, 4 calories per gram. So this is where the keto crowd does get things right. Carbohydrates aren't required in the human body. You do not need carbohydrates to live. However, life is a lot better with them in it, right? Like imagine, your potato chips, your fries, chocolate, all that kind of good stuff, sugar, beans, pastas, bread, all that kind of stuff. All of those would fall into the carbohydrates category, right? So we're going to write down here, not required for the human body, but life is a lot better with it, So not only that, but carbohydrates also give you energy, right? It's not just a feel good kind of thing. Like genuinely, they do give you energy. And say you're trying to, put on mass, put on muscle. This is where, having protein, specifically, protein, your fats, all that kind of stuff. If you are trying to do a no carb or a low carb kind of diet and building muscle, you are ultimately shooting yourself in the foot, because carbohydrates, protein is the foundational building blocks of muscle. Carbohydrates are like the jet fuel, right? They really advance and move the needle forward to get to where you want to be, right? And they also help when, you're in a deficit, you're cutting, you're trying to lose weight. They are good to have as well to, make sure you are, putting on muscle as well, right? Because if you're totally new, or maybe you haven't trained in 10, 15, 20 years, you can put on muscle simply because your body is, maybe you have trained before, you've lost some of that muscle. Having that protein, having your fats, having your carbohydrates, going to the gym, lifting weights, you will get that muscle back, even if you are in a deficit, right? Even if you are trying to lose weight. So foods, this can be like your fruits. The sugar in fruits do not be afraid of sugar in fruits. A lot of it is fiber too, but there are some fruits, high in sugar, high in fructose, think of like your bananas and all that kind of stuff. They are good for you, right? So do not be afraid of them. Fruits do not make you fat. Again, there's no specific food that makes you fat. It is just general overeating, undermoving, and low muscle mass that causes weight gain, right? So we've got our fruits here. We've got our breads, pastas. What else do we have here? We've got, beans, etc. Right? So all good stuff here. So now we have the foundation, right? Now we have the foundation, understanding of what the food does inside our body, right? If we have this understanding, then we can almost, auto-regulate this to a point, to a degree, right? And once you become more skilled, once you become more advanced, once you become, take it to that next level, this will be automatic because you'll be able to look at a food, you'll be able to look at your plate, and you'll be able to understand like what the food does to your body, right? You'll be able to understand what the food does to your body and where you might need more of certain foods, right? So for example, if maybe let's say you have a plate of something with like one chicken breast, right? One chicken breast is, depending on the size, 20 to 30 grams of protein. And you need more protein in your diet, you can double up on that chicken breast because it falls under the category of lean proteins, and you understand what protein does to your body, right? So again, protein is the most important one. And for a lot of times, what I see typically is just by virtue of eating and focusing on protein, a lot of people, the fats and the carbs, I've seen it many times with my clients, the fats and the carbs often auto-regulate themselves because they're so full from the protein. It is one of the most filling macronutrients, the most filling macronutrients, besides fiber, that will move the needle forward. So speaking of fiber here, as a bonus, fiber, some people categorize it as macronutrients, some people categorize it as micronutrients. So fiber is just not digestible by the human body, which is good because think of like corn, it just kind of flows through your body, flosses through your body, comes out the other end, and it is good for digestion. It actually helps move the needle forward in terms of like going to the bathroom, just so you don't get constipated and all that kind of stuff. So this is where you can virtually eat unlimited fiber, right? So foods high in fiber. So this could be, think of your vegetables and the colors of the rainbow, right? So your red, orange, yellow, green, purple, white vegetables. All of these are going to be high in fiber. I'm not going to list out every single vegetable. You got your red peppers, orange peppers, yellow peppers, green peppers, purple onions, white onions. Like we can go deep into this, right? That's why I don't really like focusing on specific foods, but more on food groups because it helps to ease the stress around this. Adding just one more for the carbs here, potatoes. Cool. So now we understand what food does to our body, and what certain foods do to our body. And funny how these are all like whole food, single ingredient foods you do not need to look at the back of the ingredients box and figure out what the hell it's made of. So as a general rule, if you can focus on single ingredient foods, you will be in the top 1% of health. If you focus on single ingredient foods 90% of the time, you will be in the top 1% of health. You know exactly what your food is made of because you often probably made it yourself, or you went to a restaurant and they made it themselves. You know exactly what's in it. Chances are it's not going to be deep fried, at least not often. And it's quality food that your body can digest, right? And then it's about making those kind of tweaks where, figuring out maybe there's certain foods that do not digest well, foods that do not sit well with you. And then you can do a process of elimination, right? Figuring out, taking out one food for a week or two, see if that makes a difference. And then if it was just that one food, take a break from it for a while. Maybe have it occasionally instead of every day. For example, I can give you, personally, I feel quite bloated when I have bread every day, right? I was for about a month or two, I was having bread every single day, just felt a little bit bloated. Couldn't really go to the bathroom as much. And I'm like, well, you know what? Maybe bread isn't for me every single day. I can have it occasionally. It's not going to kill me. But if I have it every day, it just doesn't sit well. So what I'll do here is we're going to go into, we did a breakdown of the macros in the food. Now, what is going to be helpful for you guys is kind of giving a two-step plan on how to actually lock in the fat loss. So naturally, by virtue of eating a lot more protein and a little bit less fats, a little bit less carbs, single ingredient food, chances are you will naturally put yourself in a fat loss phase, right? Especially if you have weight to lose, right? Because these are going to be foods that are typically a lot of protein, probably some good carbs, and probably a lot of fiber, especially if you're having a lot of vegetables here. And by virtue of all that, it's going to be low calorie, but it's going to be filling meals. It's going to be super filling meals. You won't be hungry all the time. You'll have energy. You'll be able to lose weight. Your clothes are going to fit better. You'll have more confidence to show up in everything that you do. So if you can stick with these single ingredient foods, it makes a huge difference. Now, to take it to the next level here, this is what my clients do. This is what they do the very first week of joining the program. So very first week, I do not give them any kind of hard goals in terms of, the food that they eat. I just say, eat normally, eat as you normally would. Just track everything on MyFitnessPal, right? So step one, first 7 days, normally on MyFitnessPal. It's the first time using it. It's probably going to give you some generic numbers, some macronutrients. So typically what happens is like 50% carbs, 20%, 20 or 30% protein, and then 20 or 30% fats. Everything has to equal 100%. So just eat normally and track everything on MyFitnessPal to the best of your ability on MyFitnessPal. For better accuracy, use a food scale. Use a food scale wherever possible. This takes 30 seconds to use. It's really not difficult what it's made out to be. And often the case with food scale is once you've measured it out once, twice, 3 times, you know exactly, or at least you have a better understanding how many, how much how much food you're actually taking in when it's properly weighed out. You just take that number on the food scale with whatever food that you're using, throw that in MyFitnessPal, and it's going to give you back the macronutrients. It's going to give you back the calories of what that food is. So especially fattier foods like peanut butter, because it's super easy. Going back what I was just talking about, the fats go into 9 calories per gram, right? So it's super easy to overeat on those kind of those nut butters and really kind of throw off the scale and eat 2, 3, 4, 500 extra calories a day because you have tablespoons of peanut butter, right? So super important to really measure that out, really have a good idea of what that is. So step 2, so after 7 days, we are going to break it down into, whether you're in the office or in the field. So if you're in the office, before I really get into this, as a general rule for both office and work in the field, Protein is 1 gram multiplied by your body weight. If you're over 200 pounds, just eat 200 grams protein a day. Anything more than that just gets a little redundant, right? So office, we can have low carb simply because you're not moving as much. Low carb simply because you're not moving as much. Simple as that, right? Your carb intake should match the amount of energy you're putting out in the world. If you are on your feet on the tools all day, you're getting 20,000 steps, you should probably have some rice. You should probably have some, some potatoes and fruits and some healthy sugars to match that kind of energy. Otherwise, you burn yourself out. Right? You're in the field, you can have, again, a little bit higher carb. Now, in terms of fats, this is really personal preference. Do you like darker cuts of meat? Your fats higher? Then it's really just a matter of keeping your carb low so you don't overeat. You like leaner cuts of meat, then if you like darker cuts of meat, then your fats will be higher, then your fats will be low, and your carbs might be a little higher to compensate. Simple. But again, going back to this general rule here, protein is a constant. Whether you're trying to lose weight, maintain, gain weight in the office, in the field, stays the same every day. And then fats and carbs are the last two variables to play with and will be different person to person. So let's say you troubleshoot all of this, you get this all set up, you troubleshoot. If you're not losing weight on the scale, and let's say you've got a significant amount of weight to lose, 30, 40, 50 pounds plus, this is where, cutting back on total daily intake while keeping protein the same goal, right? So then we would just cut from, your fats and your carbs. Maybe your fats are a little bit higher than what they should be. Well, let's bring that down a little bit. Maybe your carbs are a little bit higher than what they should be. Well, let's bring that down a little bit. But typically, you don't want to slash your calories too hard in the beginning, because the calories you start with won't be the same ones that you finish with. And if you slash them too hard in the beginning, that doesn't give you room to maneuver and play around with as you go on, right? If you're doing 1,500 calories right off the bat and you're, a 250-pound 5'10" male, it's going to be hard to stick with that. You might lose weight quick. That might be the goal. However, you probably can't stay at 1,500 calories every single, for the rest of your life. Eventually you'll get to a point where, you might burn out. You'll have to eat more food to compensate. And, if you aren't careful, maybe things blow back to where you were. So it's best to kind of do this in multiple phases, right? If you have 50 pounds to lose, nobody says you have to do it all in one go. Maybe you break it down into 20 to 30 pound segments, right? So maybe you do 3-4 months of being in a deficit, being in a cut, of losing weight, and you lose 20, 30 pounds, whatever that looks like. You take a break at maintenance for maybe 1 to 2 months, and then you go back into another deficit and you lose 15, 20 pounds. You go back in maintenance, and then maybe you lose 10 to 15 pounds. Each time you're going to lose a little bit less because your body isn't burning as much energy as when you were back at that original weight, right? Going back to the laws of physics, the bigger the mass of the object, the more energy it's going to use ultimately, right? Bigger the mass of the object, the more energy it's going to use. So as you lose weight, your energy is going to go down. That is simply the laws of physics. And if you cut too hard, then you lose your energy too quickly. You can't focus. You can't show up in your best possible shape. And then, maybe you rebound back to where you were. So the laws of physics do apply to this. If you are not losing weight, then you are not in a deficit. And if over time you're not as losing weight as fast as you originally did, it's because you're not as big as you originally were. Right? Now, to speed all this up on top of this, going to the gym, lifting weights, doing, getting your steps in, doing some additional cardio will help with that. So the more muscle mass you have, the higher your metabolism is going to be. And that's going to help you lose weight long-term and keep it off long-term. The more muscle you have, the more difficult it is to gain that weight back, because your metabolism is so high, even at rest, even when you're sleeping, even when you're doing desk work, even when you are sitting down driving. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. Went off on a huge tangent here for about 35 minutes. If you have any questions about this is pretty much like a masterclass in fat loss. I pretty much just turned this into a masterclass in fat loss. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this. Really hope you had some huge takeaways. If you have any questions, comments, let me know. And I'll probably save this one and share it around, all that kind of good stuff. All right, we'll stop it here. If you have any questions, let me know.